Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. We all need borders in our lives. It has become one of the best-known pieces of advice. You've got to set borders. This, of course, means that everyone has to have self-defined limits on how far anyone else can intrude on their privacy or their feelings, or pretty much anything else that they deem worth setting borders over. It is considered to be an absolute essential in our all too intrusive world in which everything is meant to be available to everyone at all times. But borders are a two-way street. Just as they are meant to prevent an outsider from sticking their nose in where it doesn't belong, they should also prevent us from sticking out of those limits into no man's land, or even worse, into somebody else's border. This part of the border arrangement is a good deal more difficult to accept. We should have no problem recognizing that our personal space is sacrosanct, though of course sometimes we do. But the other way around, us entering somebody else's space is never quite as obvious. When it comes to expanding our own space into what belongs to nobody, it certainly seems to be free for the taking. Personal borders, unlike national borders, are perceived as one-directional. Perhaps this is because the difference between the individual's personal self and that of anyone else is so blatant. In spite of all the advances of human psychology and personal development, we still have a hard time taking anyone else's existence as seriously as we take our own. When it comes to national borders, however, this distinction is not quite as clear. What really is a national border? It is totally artificial. It is simply a line drawn in the sand by some people sometime in the past. Where does Ukraine end and Russia start? What is the border of the European Union? What are the borders of Israel? There may or may not be political answers to these questions, but it's difficult to avoid the feeling that they are both temporary and made up. But we all know that without such borders, the entire idea of a nation or a country would fall apart completely. Many people today feel this is precisely what is happening right now with all the mass migration taking place into Europe and the United States. Some believe this to be a catastrophe in the making, while others consider it a long overdue movement of the times. But all agree that these borders are what defines a nation. Without them, there can be peoples and groups and religions, and these are all highly significant components of our lives. But the nation, that very human construct that goes back to biblical times, needs physical limits in order to truly work. It could be asked why it has to be this way. There have been nomadic nations in the past, a few of which still exist today. Some of these endured for centuries, if not millennia. The Mongols created the greatest empire the world has ever seen and never really had any borders. The Gypsies lasted for centuries with a fully intact culture without the slightest shred of a border. Perhaps the best example of this is the Jews, who went through almost 2,000 years of essentially borderless existence and yet remained every bit as solid and cohesive as they were on their own land with fairly firm borders. So why are borders necessary to begin with? What got into the head of the first people who decided that they needed to draw these artificial lines and say that this is mine and everything outside of it isn't? It is quite interesting that the Bible, certainly one of the first texts that we know of to describe the notion of national borders, ascribes them to a combination of divine authority and human creation. Sometimes they are set by the whims and fortunes of war and conquest, while at others they come from a decree of God. It might be tempting to say that when it comes to the land of Israel, the borders were set by God, while with everyone else, they were whatever people settled upon. Well, there's probably a good deal of truth to this. Things are not quite so simple. The borders of the Israelites were expanded by human initiative even before the Israelites entered the land. They were also expanded centuries later by the same means. The borders of the other nations, on the other hand, are occasionally described as set by divine decree. It is not easy to pinpoint where God's role ends and where the human role begins. This week's Parsha is a double reading. It is commonly called Matot-Masei, with each of those words being the title to a separate Parsha. The first, Matot, means tribes, a reference to the leaders of the tribes of Israel and a set of rules they were instructed concerning the making and annulment of vows. Following this is a battle against the Midianites, a neighboring nation who had antagonized the Israelites 2 parshas back. There are a lot of details about dividing up the spoils and treatment of prisoners. After this is a quite long section dealing with the two tribes of Reuben and Gad, who elected to settle in the newly conquered lands east of the Jordan River instead of settling in the land of Israel proper. This takes us to the end of the first Parsha. The second Parashat Matot-Masei lists all of the places that the Israelites traveled through in the course of their wanderings through the wilderness since the time of the Exodus. A good deal of these places are names that have never appeared before in the Torah. These were, by and large, the places where the Israelites encamped at one stage or another during the great journey. This is what Masei means, journeys. From this point until the end of the Parsha and the end of the book of Numbers, it is all about details of the land itself. First is the basic command to conquer the land and to divide it up. Then there are the biblical borders, the only time this important description is given in the Torah. Next, the new generation of leaders, those who would be in charge of conquering and dividing up the land, are listed. Following this are details of certain cities that must be built for the dwellings of the Levites, those whose lives would revolve around the Mishkan and public religious service. There are similar cities to be set up as refuges for those who killed another person accidentally and face the risk of revenge from their relatives. These cities of refuge were to be strategically placed so as to be accessible from all parts where the Israelites lived, with 3 on one side of the Jordan and 3 on the other. The Parsha and the book close in a rather anticlimactic manner. It is a kind of recap of the event described in last week's Parsha, in which the daughters of a certain man who died with no sons claimed their rights as his heirs to the portion of land to which he was entitled. The problem brought up is that these daughters could marry outside of their tribe, and that land would then no longer be part of the original tribe's possession. This is a kind of national border problem in which outsiders are taking over tribal land. The temporary solution that is presented as a problem is that any female heirs should marry within their own tribe. While this solved the immediate issue, it isn't clear if this wasn't simply kicking the bigger problems to come down the road. Let's get back to those borders of the land of Israel. While more details about the ancient borders of Israel appear in the book of Joshua, this is really the only place where they are presented in full detail. It is quite similar to the current borders of the modern state of Israel, which in and of itself is remarkable. The differences lie in how far the border goes to the east of the Jordan, to the north into what is now Lebanon, and to the south into what is the Negev area of modern Israel. Owing to the vagaries of ancient maps and descriptions of places, all 3 of these directions are a bit unclear. But the general impression one gets is that this is basically the same as modern Israel, with some uncertainty on the edges. There is no question that these borders were attributed to no less than God. God gives the basic command to conquer and settle the land, including the absolute requirement of driving out the original inhabitants. This part is difficult to read in light of modern sentiments, but one gets the sense that in biblical times, this was completely essential. The commandment states that whoever is allowed to remain will be as, quote, thorns in your eyes and barbs in your sides. This indeed proved to be the case. God also describes the actual borders. Quote, Hashem spoke to Moshe, telling him to say to the Israelites, when you come to the land of Canaan, these are the borders of the land that shall fall to you as an inheritance. It couldn't be clearer that this was the divine decree. This is no great surprise, since this was the promise that was made many times to the patriarchs hundreds of years earlier. God had promised this land to their descendants, and now God was making good on that promise with very clear borders. Assuming we accept that this was indeed done by divine decree, it could still be asked why this was necessary. Couldn't the borders be whatever they happened to conquer and to settle? This was ultimately what it turned out to be anyway, so why was it necessary to have these divinely ordained borders to begin with? I am personally unaware of how often the claim has been made of some national border that it was established by God. It seems to have been quite rare at best, and it is possible that the case of biblical Israel is unique in this regard in the history of the world. Perhaps there is an element of destiny at play here. If these would have been garden variety national borders from the outset, it is possible that the ultimate fate of this land would have been entirely different. The Israelites would have lived there until they were thrown out, and then some other peoples would have settled. Perhaps the land would have remained empty for vast stretches of time. Who knows? But it would have been the same as anywhere else. With the divine decree element in the works, it set into motion the destiny of this highly unique area. The Israelites and their successors, the Jews, would never be able to let go of this place. It would remain in the back or the front of their collective mind. This was decided by God. The return of the Jews to modern Israel, certainly one of the more remarkable events of recent history, and possibly in all of history, was a result of this divine decree. It couldn't be any other way. We all need borders. We need them for ourselves and we need them for our nations. They define to some degree who we are. When those borders are set by God, they become all the more solid and essential. In a sense, even our personal borders are set by God because God determines to a great degree who we are and who we shall become. Those borders have to be kept and protected as the holy spaces that they are. Anything else would be a slap in the face to God. Shabbat Shalom.